Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is still paying attention because it's been a long journey, but a very useful journey. Thank you, Amexipac, for the invitation, and thank you, SAT, for the invitation to the tax agency. And I'm very happy to be part of such an interesting forum. And I have the opportunity to share this panel with Alfonso Castro from the tax agency, and Ovani Tercio from Costa Rica, and Fernando Martinez. And I don't need to introduce him because you already know who he is. The topic of this panel is the electronic document. We have been analyzing the different stages of digital taxation in digital administration. So it is important to manage and talk about the relevance of an e-document and what elements are affected when the change of paradigm takes place. We have already mentioned this before. This is an administration that was used to working with hard copies and working with certain processes. And now there is an administration that is going to focus on electronic documents. One of the first elements that we can analyze, and I would like to listen to your opinion, panel members, which technological gaps or which cultural gaps have you faced in each country that may have hindered the use of e-documents for tax administration? I don't know, Giovanni, if you would like to start. All these documents in tax administration end up being electronic documents. There was a problem with the sound. There is still a problem with the microphone. The documents are always electronic, and then we had to edit them to process them. These documents now have been privatized. Digitalization is now given to a private sector, and then we get an electronic file. So this has several advantages for the tax administration. We do not have any digitalization problems. We do not have problems with bad estimations, arithmetic differences or deviations. And this has worked pretty well for tax administration. In Costa Rica, in 2001, we started releasing hub programs for electronic invoices, and these we allow them to get their taxes and print these files. 40% of the taxpayers some years later were using this program. 60% were filling out pre-printed formats, and then we decided to have a mandatory use of this program. And even though 60% did not use these formats, we made a very fast transition that took about 1 month. So everyone started using the program without any complaints or additional resources. 3 months later, we established the mandatory filing of the tax return through internet. So it's zero paper. 98% of our documents and payments are done electronically. We hardly depend on hard copies. We used to depend on the banking network. Now all computers with internet access can be the receiver of one of our formats. Thank you very much. What about you, Alfonso? We have seen Costa Rica's evolution on filing tax returns. Can you tell us about any cultural or technological resistance in Spain? Of course. I would like to start by thanking SAT for the invitation to be in this forum with Mexipac. This is a great opportunity for us, and we are very happy to share our experiences with all of you and contribute with a little bit. So I would like to start by giving a brief introduction. In Spain, we started using telematic tax return filing many years ago. We started with large companies. We made it mandatory for large companies to file their tax returns on quarterly basis. Then with the small and medium-sized companies, and from then till now, we have been gradually given mandatory filing of tax returns. In 2010, it was an important year because in Spain, for public administration, a law was passed on electronic processes. Every procedure can be made through internet. As of that year, all the activities in our institution, over 600 processes, over 2,000 paperwork could be done through internet. This path has led us to last year, 85% of tax return filing was done through internet, and so far we are at around 90%. So this means that internet filing is mandatory for all companies, and for individuals we are in a very high percentage level. And I would like to mention something else. When we talk about electronic documents, not only do we include e-filing, but also any type of document, that is, any document that is filed by a taxpayer, which could be a resource, it could be a claim. Everything is regarded as an electronic document because it becomes part of the system and it's part of the process. So I'm going to focus on tax filing. So I'm sorry for the introduction, but I thought it was important. We started 15 years ago. When we started, the gap was enormous. When we wanted to go faster, we faced several obstacles. One obstacle was internet access. Internet in some areas was difficult. We're talking about 1998 and 1999. Fortunately, now the coverage is larger and this is not an issue anymore. So that's a problem now from the cultural perspective. There is a problem for certain sectors to be able to do filing through internet. We have to do things simpler to be able to reach all society. Well, with regards to gaps, I would like to mention that there are areas in which we're currently working on. The first thing is to eliminate complexity as much as possible. I'm not going to talk about this point much more specifically. I think that during the Q&A session, I will be able to answer more specific questions, and whenever there is such a new process, we need to make it as simple as possible. Something obvious as well is to help the taxpayer through information provided to the taxpayer and also in situ information, having a call center and multi-channel call center that can help taxpayers and can help all these tax administration offices so they can become part of the cycle and also make it simpler for the taxpayer. And last but not least is representation. Tax filing should not always be filed by the taxpayer himself or herself. Sometimes we have intermediaries that file these that files the tax return. We have two figures: social collaboration. Social collaboration allows having consultants and other financial institutions to file tax returns. If you are part of one of these associations, people or members of these associations are capable of filing tax returns. Representation is implicit. You don't have to show it or give evidence of this to the administration, to the tax administration. If there is a question about the representation, then it will be requested a posteriori or after the event. Almost 40% of tax return filing is done through an intermediary, and there is another figure that is known as the owner of the power. That is, any person through internet or a person that attends our offices shows the power or to introduce a process or to represent in all activities. These are some measures that we consider important and that have allowed us to avoid obstacles. We have to continue working on this. There is a technological complexity. We want to reach society and we want to achieve the percentages that I mentioned before. Thank you very much, Alfonso. I think that you have mentioned very important aspects, and during these 15 years, everything has evolved. Technology has evolved much, much faster. So thank you very much for your point of view. Internet access is not an issue anymore. Now we have new technologies and the use of these technologies have expanded. So our task is to facilitate our processes that are not always as simple as they should be, such as internet access. So we need to share with the audience and we have to share as well with the professionals and tax professionals the ways to help taxpayers, intermediaries, to support taxpayers so they can file their tax returns, but also to comply with their obligations as well as help them with tax administration interpretation. Can you talk about the cultural obstacles that you have found or gaps that you have found for the use of internet and these technologies? Thank you very much. Thank you for the people from the private sector, Mexipac, and colleagues from different tax administrations. As you can see, many things have been said about the tax administration in Mexico, but I would like to add a little bit much more of the things that we have encountered. What we want with an electronic document is reliability, and also that the taxpayer should feel confident of using the e-document. When we talk about the hard copies and then talking about electronic documents, we need to go through a change, and also the taxpayer should trust these e-document and have legal certainty. The Mexican tax administration has gone through a process where tax filing went through an electronic process, or started going through an electronic process 12 years ago, and this has been a turning point in our tax administration because the paper stopped being the significant element that was touchable and that was tangible, let's say. Now we have transformed from using hard copies to using e-documents. Trust was given to the stamp, to the seal, and to the bank teller. Now, talking about e-documents, we have changed that process, and now we have gone through not trusting e-documents. The taxpayer wonders, where's my information? Where is my information kept? And there are things that facilitate things. Mexico started with electronic filing, and this was a huge change, and the SAT started controlling the information from having information printed in a document. Now we went to the electronic document, and now we are in electronic billing, and the private sector is an intermediary for the communication. When we talk about registration, the tax administration took control of the data, and through certain tools, we take the information. At the end of the day, everything has to do with a cultural change that has to do with trusting the authorities, and also something that is basic. We need to close the gap of people thinking, where can I get my information? Now the information is not in my hands, so where is the information? So Mexico is going through these changes. We started with e-filing, e-billing, registration, as is done nowadays, and now we are in a new mechanism that is mailbox, tax mailbox, and audits. So the taxpayer is not confident about where the information is kept, who's taking the information. So it takes some time for the taxpayer to get used to it, to understand everything. So there is huge information management inside and outside tax administration. The combination of the skills, that is technology, IT, people that what they see is what they believe in. So we have these electronic documents, and the way we are providing information is changing. And I want to give these two examples that we have in our country. The majority of the information is taken by SAT and is provided through internet, and then the other one is through a standard. We provide that information to the society so that it is constructed with standards, and that's the way we have the communication. Now, in the middle, we have a safe means. The safe means is the tax mailbox that will provide that certainty of the interaction between the tax administration and the taxpayer. And as the head of the SAT mentioned, we need to have a safe place that is a turning point, and the taxpayer and the citizen is confiding his or her identity his or her information, something that is not tangible, something that is going to be given away. And this is a great challenge that we feel it's just starting and that we will gradually land it so that the citizen and or taxpayer will continue understanding the effort of Mexico in this great task is incredible. Trust is essential in the internet world. The taxpayer, the citizen, is going through a new way of having a relationship with the authorities and with the government entities. So there's another question. So how does the taxpayer benefit in a direct manner of this progress to digital taxation? Because we are asking the taxpayer a new way to exchange information. So there should be positive effects of that way of relating with the authorities. So what's the benefit for the taxpayer, in other words? They have benefited because the processes are simpler. They can comply with their obligations in a simpler manner. They had to go to the bank before. They had to queue for hours. Sometimes there were some checkpoints and many filters in the manual handling of these documents. There's more reliability in the information, and these things are much more directed to the taxpayers that are not complying with their obligations. There are sectors of taxpayers that took advantage of these failures in the process to stop paying their taxes. Probably it's sports for them, but you get the feedback from taxpayers, accountants, consultants. How do you say that? Well, most people say that complying with the obligations is easier. There are more communications channels where they can ask questions and they can feel more confident that they are complying with their obligations. Thank you, Giovanni. I think simplicity for taxpayers is essential, and this is the way to reduce errors, and it is a great progress of the use of electronic documents. Alfonso, I don't know if you want to give your opinion. Well, I couldn't agree more with our colleague from Costa Rica, so I'm not going to be repetitive. In several studies in Europe, we have estimated that there are savings up to 50 euros for every virtual or electronic process that is done. Not only operators win after they started in the process. Well, we know that the beginning was hard, but we all won. The tax administration was able to reduce costs. We have a very important headcount that have changed their role in the tax administration. Data quality is much better. As I said, data quality is better, and also there are less errors. So it's a process, and time is money. In Spain, as many of you know, we're just going through a crisis and we're coming out of the crisis. That crisis has led us to not hiring new people when people retire. But I feel that the electronic processing globalized electronic processing has allowed us to cushion part of the loss of headcount that we have experienced in Spain. Thank you very much, Alfonso. Well, we have been able to reduce costs and make things simpler. And I think it is important to point out as well that during e-file, and once we get used to e-file, we wouldn't go back. We wouldn't do it as we used to do it in the past, because we would have to use the same amount of people that was then working in the tax administration. There is a concept that is basic for people that are working in tax administration. We have to be more efficient and to reduce costs. We have to be much more cost effective. So I would like to give an example. When the Tax Administration Service started the process for filing, for electronic filing and electronic payment, a citizen was asking for a certification of a tax filing. That I will give the example of a South Tax Administration. This is an organization that manages thousands of documents. So when the citizen wanted the certification of the document that was filed in the bank, required this validation in an organization that manages millions of documents, this request lasted almost over a year with the electronic process, and I'm going to go to another process, which is the electronic documents. The process that took 1 year, now that we have this dynamic of e-services and of tax tax administration, now there is something that is certified in seconds. What does this mean? What concepts can we discuss as tax administration? So we went from a static or stagnant information provider to a more dynamic one. So this has led us to be much more cost effective. Now let's talk about costs. In the billing world, a study was conducted for the manufacturing industry. It was $12 to produce an invoice, a hard copy. So now we want to get to 5 billion documents. What would this be in savings for the manufacturers and also for the tax administration? So we are much more efficient and more productive. A process that led to storing documents, filing documents, filing tax filings, and with all these errors involved. So in the tax administration business, I would like to give an opinion. Our business is data, and data should be active, should be dynamic. And if the means telephones and technology is leading us in a different direction, we are moving towards that very same direction. And instead of having passive information on paper, we are now transforming to being a data provider with a much more active and dynamic attitude. We can identify taxpayers with bad behaviors, and we can identify many other things. And this is a methodology of tax administration. So we can become more efficient with active data. We want this data to be useful to tell the taxpayers what they are doing correctly and what they're doing wrong, to register more taxpayers. So I would say that we are focusing on taxpayers, and we are focusing on the organization to see how efficient are we to manage this information. We have to focus on that. So our business is information. I agree with that. And we have to regulate this information and manage it correctly. If we have no information, we cannot do anything. We have to use data to become much more efficient and to make sure that taxpayers are paying fair taxes. Now, with regards to certificates, well, this is a topic that was an issue for us in Spain. Not only were we concerned about having access to this certification once the taxpayer has filed the tax return, and probably this person was filing for a grant or for a loan for a house, and maybe this information was not enough. The capability of having the electronic information and the process and an electronic process, it allows us to provide that information to the taxpayer in a very fast manner. Now there is like a self-service where the taxpayer can get his or her own certificate. So now we do not have that burden in our office that can be done by the taxpayers. We do not need extra headcount, and it's something very positive for the taxpayer, and it includes the most recent information from the taxpayer, and we can prevent taxpayers from having negative behavior, let's say. So we now have a much more efficient work, and it allows us to sustain public burdens. So which have been the most efficient things you have done in the processes? What circumstances can you pinpoint, or what things have been much more effective for electronic documents? Giovanni. Yes, I have a very good example because it had to do with data processing, which had to be with informative filing. The due date is November 30th every year, and the capability of starting activities based on that information had an important 5-month delay. And it wasn't until May where we could control that information. As of 2011, those tax returns are filed through internet, so we can have control processes 2 weeks after the taxes have been filed. The first year, we made it mandatory. We extended the filing date 3 months, and the taxpayers were very happy and nobody complained. And we started managing and exploiting this information a month before than what we were doing in previous years. Thank you very much. What about you, Alfonso? Well, in our case, I think that if we ask the society in Spain, I think that they would unanimously talk about tax income for individuals. This is a service that we started in 2003, but we have been improving it year after year, and most of taxpayers in Spain are using this electronic process for tax filing. So instead of just checking, we can be part of a partnership with our taxpayers. 95% of taxpayers use the draft that we provide to them with some slight corrections and additions. And they start with the draft that is provided by the tax administration based on the third-party information that So sometimes it's been thought that the tax administration will not have enough tools to continue managing the information, but that's not true. That taxpayers now have this sense of control of the information that the agency has. And that means that since they know we are regulating and controlling the information, they are more confident. On April the 2nd, income tax filing is about 20 million. So we were 1 million people, 5% requested the draft. Year by year, the demand is higher and higher. And we open at 12 p.m. Minute one, there were many files that have been acknowledged. It's very hard to check all that information in that time. So they all assume that the information from our agency is correct because we send them a draft, and many times it is a tax return, and people would like to file that as soon as possible to see the results and to see the return reflected in their bank accounts. Alfonso, well, thank you very much. And Giovanni, thank you very much for your participation as well. In order to encourage taxpayers, we have to tell the taxpayers about the benefits of e-filing, the benefit of a draft, a pre-populated filing format. This is information that can be provided by the tax administration, and sharing these benefits with taxpayers is extremely important. That will be important not only for the administration but also for the citizens. So what would be the most important thing or the cornerstone in Mexico? Well, in Mexico, as in many countries, the citizen's perception is what is received from the tax administration. In the previous panel, the return was mentioned, the return process was mentioned. This is the great challenge that we have as a tax administration, to return the money in less than 5 days. That couldn't be possible, and we have to make the analogy of what we had in the previous world with papers and hard copies to what we can do nowadays. This draft that was given by the tax administration allows us to make the return processes faster. And for the taxpayer, this is good news. When there's a return, it's good news. And we have to continue facing this challenge. The taxpayer can face very good news that the taxpayer is getting a return. But on the other hand, we need to notify something that may not make the taxpayer very happy. This is a clear example on how the tax administration, through electronic documents, can go from different activities. That is, in the past, there was an activity that was carried out by people that had to go to the addresses. Now there is a new way of communication, that is the mailbox. We were going to start giving them an electronic document in the mailbox. We're not going to give a hard copy or an envelope to the person in his or her home. In the past, people started using a mailbox, and now we're going to have an electronic mailbox in a very efficient manner. We are translating that document that was in paper or that is a hard copy, to an electronic document. The return is very good news, but we are going to have digital documents that will be notifications, and we are going to have electronic audits in the future. This will be another way of digital document, and this order of audit will become an electronic document that the taxpayer will see differently. Now they will not see the auditors knocking on their doors. Now you have the good news of being the audited taxpayer. You have a return, but now you are subject to an audit. And all these things that in Mexico will happen, and that are challenges for all of us. And now we're doing this with taxpayers. We had very small companies, small establishments. In Mexico, we call them miscellaneous, small drugstores, small pharmacies, small businesses that are currently using electronic services. We also offer the accounting process through electronic means, electronic billing through an internet website where they can enter their income, where they can create their invoices. This is a great change or major change in our country. They are not used to using electronic devices and electronic processes. So the tax administration has to present all these options through internet, not like we're doing with electronic billing that is a private sector. The tax administration is taking the lead, is offering the tool for complying with the obligations, and it is offering mechanisms so that these small businesses can comply with their obligations. It's not complex, it's easy, and allow these small companies and small establishments to meet their obligations. I think all comments have very interesting, and I would like to point out two things. The barrier, the traditional barrier between the information and support and leaving the taxpayer to act, and the other part that is controlling and regulating. When we create a help process, we include control mechanisms. When we have e-filing, we make sure that the information is correct. So checking or double checking or controlling after the event is no longer the choice. Now we're doing both things at the same time. We used to have two traditional stages: assistance, letting the taxpayer act, and then controlling and supervising. But this stage is still there, but the other two stages are becoming one. We control before the taxpayer does everything or does anything, and this makes our actions much more, we can provide much transparency, and also we're now much more cost effective. I think this is an important element. Fortunately, we do not have any representatives from the mail because they have not benefited from this progress. Well, we are in Spain going through a restriction process where we are reducing headcounts. But with the new business model, not only in our administration, in our tax administration, but in the whole administration, this will benefit many people. Now, maybe some people from the mail will be reincorporated to other agencies because their activities have been reduced. Once we have analyzed these measures, another aspect that we have prepared for this panel is to look at the future. If you could write a Santa Claus list, what would you ask for? If we could implement something what would it be? What new technology would you like to use? What would be your proposal? Maybe here we have to be very creative without restrictions. You have the freedom of being very creative. Well, we do not have to make a great effort to find areas where we can improve because there are many tax administrations, Mexico, Spain, Chile, that have developed many things that have to be implemented. Specifically, I think that the use of electronic mailbox is very important for us. The preparation processes that need a notification from the tax administration have a $25 cost. Of course, doing this in such an easy manner would allow us to widen the possibilities of the individuals that we can control, and you don't have to be so confident because there is always a growing business of fake invoices. They have an almost perfect profile, but deductibility of an invoice not only depends on the approved validation, but the expense has to be useful for future and current income. And in Costa Rica, we have a regulation that all payments that surpasses 2,000 US dollars has to be done through the banking system to make it deductible. So there are three measures now, and in addition, we have to visit the taxpayers on regular basis, and we also have information that allows us to determine risk levels to see which taxpayers have to be visited to see that their activity really corresponds to their taxpayers' characteristics. And we have to consider the use of electronic documents, establish mandatory use of electronic processes and infrastructure to be able to exploit this information and translate it into risk analysis and control. And I repeat myself, there are administrations, some are advancing faster than others, but in this World Forum, we can take all these experiences to enrich our own work. So this has to be one of the objectives of this forum, and that is the purpose of the participation or involvement of many of us. So let's take advantage of all the information that we have. So what is the proposal looking at the future? Well, I would like to go back to reduction of technological complexity because this is one of the barriers that we face and that make it harder for us to make progress. In Spain, we have electronic filing, and because of this, we had to have a certificate, an electronic certificate, and a signature, and that signature of the filing process requires certain things in the server, in the browser, and all this generates lots of incidents. Like an anecdote we have experienced today in July, there's a new Java version at the middle of the month, in very close to the end of the period. Many taxpayers have called us because they are facing many problems. We have had to strengthen our services to have special support people. This technological complexity has to be avoided. We need to have very user-friendly services that can be executed in any type of device. So it can be executed in desktops, laptops, tablets. Otherwise, we will not succeed. In January 2014, entrepreneurs and professionals have to file their taxes through an electronic media. So it's not perfect now, but we have to be more proportional. So what do I mean? Something that allows to show identity even though we don't reach the level. We have PIN 24. It is something that just started in January. We have over 600,000 taxpayers. We have a long way to go. The taxpayer registers once in the offices or directly with a letter that is sent to the tax address. And we once we have some data like the bank information, the cell phone of the taxpayer is linked to our administration, and every time he or she wants to use one of our services, an SMS is sent or an email is sent, so the taxpayer can run a program in their cell phones. That's only for individuals, not for companies. And we also have the companies. With regards to companies, and taking into consideration the proportional factor, well, certification is not an issue in the mobile devices. The problem is the signature. So we have decided and we have started this stage that we're going to gradually eliminate the cryptographic signature. Instead of using the certificate for the signature, we're given an element so that the taxpayer acknowledges what he or she is doing based on the identification of the certificate, but we avoid the use of the complements in the servers that, due to the security failures in the industry, they're making the taxpayers to use this type of media. So the certificate has to continue being valid, and we have to complement this with some other evidence. If we have an incident, we have to show in court that this person is the one that has filed his or her taxes. We have to prove identity, and we can do that, but we have to reduce complexity so that these devices and these processes can be used by regular people. Well, simplicity of tax norms is something that we learned in topic 1, and we have to also consider simplicity of the tools that are closely related to tax administration. We have to conciliate some guarantees with the simplicity of use of technologies. This is a challenge we all have to face. Fernando, what about your wish list and future challenges? What do you suggest or what do you propose? The great challenge of tax administration, and that is not exclusive for Mexico, it is a simple tax norm. A simple tax norm allows simple technology solutions. When we have a challenge, that challenge is linked to the sophistication of the transactions among taxpayers. Here, as technology, norms and regulations have to be complex because the way of avoiding fiscal fraud is complex as well. So as we see technology progress, we can also see complex ways of avoiding taxes. So this is the great challenge that we all face, how to identify these income sources that do not have a location that can be easily tracked. And this is where our regulations, norms and regulations have a high complexity level because the transactions are complex. And obviously, the way these structures are have also a major complexity level. So as we make these tax norms and regulations simpler, well, the taxpayer will understand that we're looking for voluntary compliance. But it's not good to say ourselves or to mention or to to say that we are the ones that are doing things very simple. I think that the ones that have to say that are the taxpayers. The tax administration has to provide tools and solutions that are at the level of their segment, that are at the level of their possibilities, where the taxpayer perceives that the tax administration is looking for ways to make life simpler. This is the great challenge. If we want to look for a different status, well, this is when we're working on predictive tools, and the citizen only has to say, I agree with the tax administration. I don't. Yes, I'll pay. It's simple and it's cheap. I think that this is the great challenge. I think it is complex now because the more sophistication there is in the transaction, more sophistication there should be in tax administration. I think that we all share the need of simple norms and regulations to enforce them, to interpret them, and to translate them into our processes. It's a challenge that is really hard and it is really complex, but we have to try to avoid losing sight of this. I think we have exceeded the time we had for this panel, but as a summary, I would say that we have seen the experiences of the three different countries, the implementation of electronic documents. It's not only tax filing, but also is part of the processes in the administration, in the tax administration. And in order to moving forward and in order to reach or attain our goals, the taxpayer has to benefit from the simplification of the processes, the cost effectiveness of the processes, because now there are much more sophisticated frauds. So we have to look for ways to make this simpler because the voluntary taxpayer base has to be increased. Thank you very much to the panel members, and thank you very much to all of you for listening to our opinions. Now, we're going to have a Q&A session. There are going to be 3 questions. Please raise your hand so that you can get the microphone. Does anyone want to make a question to the panel members? I think we have been very clear. Or you want to go to the beach? Alfonso, could you clarify? Because I wasn't able to take notes. What about eliminating all the processes to file taxes? Because at first you needed a digital certificate, browser, and other elements, and now you're eliminating this for individuals and companies. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this and how much bureaucracy has been eliminated to make this process easier? We haven't reached the detail we would like to have, but traditionally, any process or any proceeding conducted by a taxpayer, the taxpayer had to identify himself or herself through a format and then the signature. The signature did not was not a problem 10 years ago because that step was very simple for citizens. But in just recent years, the industry has seen security problems in order to make it interoperability interfunctional. We use Java as a link that generates multiple incidents. I think that many of you have experienced this directly or indirectly. So we eliminated the signature based on the certificate, and we just provide a message as a disclaimer on the type of process that is going to be done by the taxpayer. So I have the identity. The identity is given by the certificate. So the citizen with that certificate has been identified, and I keep this information in the system to show to a third party that this citizen has been the one that filed the tax return and not any other citizen. So we have an advanced signature, and the advanced signature makes this model simpler, and all the effort that has been made with the different tax administrations can be used at the desktops and laptops, and also in other types of devices that are currently being used, tablets and things like that. Now, access to our portal is done through mobile devices, and this will continue growing. So we have to do something that can be used in all types of devices. If we continue working towards a different direction and does not allow compliments due to the security element, we will not be able to move forward. We're going to face lots of difficulties. I hope I have explained this very clearly. If not, I'm willing to explain a little bit further. Do you have any other question for the panel members? Somebody over here is raising the hand. Good afternoon. This question is for Giovanni. What are the expectations in Costa Rica for the implementation of electronic billing, and if it's going to be mandatory in that country? In 2011, the president of Costa Rica announced that it was going to be mandatory electronic billing for professionals. This was part of compensatory measures before the failure of a tax reform. Some efforts have been made. In September last year, Tax Administration released an application so that professionals can issue electronic invoices without any charge. And this is thinking in the future and eliminating the resistance of taxpayers that may say that the cost of the invoices was not fair, or it did not fit. However, we have some problems in the technology area that will not allow us to do this. So just having an electronic billing without being able to use the information will have no point. We have voluntary electronic billing, but we have some development opportunities, and I think that for the second semester of 2015, we can think of a mandatory electronic billing. Before that, I don't think that will happen. We have the last question. Well, many things have been said about technological challenges in Spain, for instance, with the specific technologies. Based on that, which should be the evolution of tax administration with regards to technological progress, because now that is something massive, or in something standard may not be massive and standard in 3 years, and sometimes the technology evolves in such a way that it makes it chaotic to handle it as a process. So which should be the main efforts of this tax administration to make the use of this electronic invoicing massive and it does not become an issue for taxpayers or a difficulty? That's a very good question. I think that at the end, and I'm going to pass the floor to Alfonso because Alfonso is the IT expert in Spain. But from the business point of view, at the end, we have to think of our procedures and how they can be standardized. We have to be able to operate among the different areas and among the different agencies. We need to process, standardize each of the stages in such a way that changing from one technological model to another technological model should be easier and flawless. We're reaching a level of standardization, but we have a long way to go. We are working towards that, and we know in all our countries there is an exchange of information, the FATCA initiative and other processes. The administrations are no longer isolated agencies. Now there has to be an interoperability of our systems, and we have to create simpler segments that can allow us to integrate them to the larger picture. Giovanni. Well, I think that it's pretty difficult to do that, and it requires a lot of investment from tax administrations. As Alfonso mentioned, the scenario was simpler when you had an internet browser that was common for everybody. Now there are many platforms for the administration. We release an application for Windows, but there are many users for many other apps, so we have to start generating all the changes with this version, with this other release and this release. And now this is used with Windows release 9. We cannot continue working with that. If we want to simplify our processes, we have to think of the capability of the taxpayer of choosing the media used by them. So we have to use the tools that are related to technological transparency. If technology is changing, the standard should remain the same. I think it's hard work to do, and it has to do based on the point of view of the taxpayer and not on that tax administration. Thank you very much, panel members from Spain, Alfonso Castro, Costa Rica, Giovanni Tencio Pereira, Mexico, Fernando Martinez Cost,